Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey y'all, Darren here, and welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. I can't believe it's 2015. Wow, we've done over 60 shows, and this podcast has been going now for 2 years. So I just want to thank you so much for listening to the show and supporting the show. It's been great to help hundreds of applicants that come to our site for school selection help, and to see many of them getting into great MBA programs. This year, I want to have a lot more student journey type interviews on the show, in addition to our Q&As with admissions directors, because I think you can learn a lot from applicants who have just gotten in. One such applicant and a listener of the podcast, Da Ming, applied to 8 top business schools and got into 6 of them, including Kellogg, Insead, Duke, Cornell, Ross, and CEIBS. And with many of those schools, he also received scholarship funding. So Da Ming obviously did something right. And in this episode, he shares his lessons learned about what are some of the common misconceptions that MBA applicants have about the process, as well as his tips on school selection, positioning. I think he has some really unique insights there that you all can benefit from. How to get great recommendations, and of course, how to knock that interview out of the park. So these are insights from an applicant who just got into a lot of great schools. So I hope you enjoy this one. And if you have questions that you'd like to ask Da Ming, go head over to touchmba.com/Da Ming. That's DAMING. And leave your questions in the comments section, and I'm sure Da Ming would love to help you out there. He's been really generous in sharing his insights. So if you need help figuring out which MBA programs best fit you, go head over to touchmba.com and upload your profile there. We'd love to help you out. That's what we specialize in, school selection. It's so important that you're applying to schools that fit you and that you're competitive at. So you can do that at touchmba.com. And Da Ming is also a part of our Admissions Edge community. So we have an online MBA admissions course where we go through the essential things you need to know to materially improve your chances. And we have an attached forum and community to that, of which Da Ming is a member. So if you don't want to pay thousands of dollars to an admissions consultant and you want the next best thing, this is it. So that's at touchmba.com/course. So go check that out, and let's get straight to the episode. It's my pleasure to introduce the next guest to the podcast, Da Ming. And actually, Da Ming came to Touch MBA more than a year ago to get help with some school selection. And now he's done amazingly well in the MBA application process. He just got into a number of top-ranked schools, including Kellogg, Insead, Duke, Cornell, and Ross, some with scholarships, and CEIBS as well. And I thought it'd be great to bring Da Ming on the podcast so he could share, some of the lessons learned along his journey, because he's done a great job of researching schools and obviously applying successfully to schools. So I can't wait to learn more from Da Ming. Da Ming, welcome to the Touch MBA podcast.
Hi, Darren. Thanks very much for the invitation. More than a year ago, I came to Touch MBA, to look for some podcasts, and I think that I really benefited by listening to some of the admission officers and some of the guests, and especially from speaking to Darren. And maybe I can begin by a brief introduction of myself. So basically, I was born in China, and I went to Singapore to study, at 8, and later I served military and went to do my undergraduate in the UK in University College London. After graduation, it was a tough year, financial crisis, but I managed to secure a job at Ernst & Young's London office. And about after 1.5 years, I came to work in China in a local real estate company, and I was responsible mainly for international investments across 8 different geographies. So I applied to 8 schools in 2014 and 15 season, and I was quite fortunate to have gotten 6 offers. I got rejected by Yale without interview, which I don't understand why, and many others don't understand as well. And I went to interview at Tuck on campus, and I didn't get the offer. And I think I might speak more about this later about on-campus interviews and interview tips. Yeah. So maybe Darren, you can run the show now.
Yeah, no, it's great to mention those rejects as well, right? Because it just shows that you need to apply to a good number of top schools. You can never truly predict why you get in. But also, I thought it would be interesting for you to mention what you're doing on the side as well, because I think that's an important part of your profile in terms of impact venture solutions.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when I first came to China in 2013, I was helping a number of startups in Beijing because many of the startups, they are founded by entrepreneurs who are predominantly, computer majors, and they sometimes have problems, speaking with investors, writing business plans, and writing financial plans. So I realized that, given the financial background, I can help them to raise money, and I can help them to solve some problems. And after some initial success, I realized I'm getting more clients. So I managed to get more volunteers from Beijing, London, and Singapore to form this, organization called Impact Ventures. And we help startups and social enterprises on a pro bono basis. I mean, it is a very interesting, exercise, and we met lots of interesting people. Very recently, we managed to help Grameen Bank in China. So basically, Professor Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner, he came to China recently, and they are starting their operation in China. So I was very fortunate to know the Grameen, general manager in China, and I even got my people to help them here, and that's a really interesting experience.
And what do you plan to do post MBA? What's your plan as of now?
I was very sure that I needed an MBA because my career path. So basically, in my current job, I work in a large real estate company, and I'm doing international investment. And in order to do this job well, you need a very strong network. You need a strong brand, and a very high quality experience in large MNCs will be very helpful. Because after that, you can come in at a much more senior level when you play the international, card. So I have decided very long ago that I need an MBA. And as to what I want to do after my MBA, I think at the moment I'm more, inclined to do consulting. But I'm apparently considering other options as well. But I think consulting is at the moment my number one choice.
Yeah, and consulting in Asia, right?
Yeah, I think it should be in Asia.
So now, our listeners know a bit more about your background and your post-MBA goals and what you're doing on the side. So let's talk now about the lessons you learned through this long 2-year journey. I know you started a long time ago. So let's first start with what do you think are the common misconceptions that MBA applicants have, when they're starting this application journey? Because you've been living it for the past 2 years.
Yeah, I think there are a number of misconceptions. Personally, I feel I'm more qualified to talk about these misconceptions in the Asian and especially the Chinese context, because China is a large, or actually I would say huge MBA market. There are many Chinese people who are applying to top programs every year, and I think it's the second most competitive pool after India.
Yeah.
So I think some of the biggest misconceptions about MBA is that they think that having a high GMAT, or having a brand name employer like Procter & Gamble, Morgan Stanley, those famous employers, or some other outstanding achievements alone are going to guarantee them entry in the top programs. And I personally think that's not true, simply because I see many such people failing to get offers, failing to get even a single offer despite applying to 4 or 5 schools. So I think I want to address these concerns one by one. I think one of the biggest myths that's affecting a lot of people is the brand name of your employer. Like some people will say, if you don't work for a Fortune 500 company, if you don't work for a top investment bank or consulting, then maybe you're not qualified for the top schools, which I don't think is true. I think this is true to an extent for Harvard and Stanford. And I mean, if you just look at their people, right, they just don't really take in any people from non-blue chip backgrounds. If they're not from blue chip background, they are generally people who have done amazing things in Africa, in Afghanistan, or some things that's really off the blue. But I strongly believe that even if you don't work for a really prestigious employer, you are still very capable of getting into at least MIT, Kellogg, Booth, CBS, and the schools below them, including LBS and Insead. So I think the most important thing that an applicant needs to understand is that you're not competing with everyone else. You know, if you work for, say, you know, like myself, if you work in a Chinese real estate company, which the American AOs probably have never heard about.
By AOs, you mean admissions officers?
Yeah, admission officers. You know, they might not have heard of your company before, and but you're not really competing with people from Procter & Gamble or Morgan Stanley or McKinsey. You're in a separate pool altogether. So you're competing with people who are most like yourself. You have different challenges to overcome depending on the backgrounds that you have. So, for example, I mean, if you work in top investment banking, okay, you have some advantages. It means that, you know, the schools are very confident of your analytical skills. You know, you work for a very selective company. You know, they have faith in your abilities, but you're also competing with people like yourself because there are so many bankers who apply every year. So you need to use strong essays and interesting extracurriculars to differentiate yourself. And on the other hand, if you work for a company that the AO has never heard before, I think your main challenge is to make sure that you address their concerns.
So how did you do that?
Yeah, I think it's like there are a number of ways to address concerns. I mean, one of the reasons why some people might think that if you don't work for a large employer, you know, your chances might be lower is because I think it's a matter of signaling and quality. You know, admission officers, they want to be risk-free. They want to make sure that once they admit you, you can find a job. But if I don't really understand your company, I'm not sure of the quality of your experience. So one of the ways to address this concern is to firstly show very strong career progression. Make sure you do as best as you can and get promoted as fast as possible. Gain as much exposure to cross-functional projects to make an impact, and really understand your story and understand how you can contribute in manners that in ways that people working in the large employers can't. Because if you work in, say, you know, Procter & Gamble or General Electric or Goldman Sachs, okay, they are very large and structured companies which don't really give you much opportunities to do something different in the first few years of a career. But if you work for a smaller company, you are much more likely to gain the opportunity to take on large responsibilities early in your career. So, for example, I myself, you know, because of my unique, background, I have a very strong international exposures, and I was very eager. I managed to get many large projects early in my career, and I was able to negotiate with vice presidents of Hyatt and senior bankers, you know, very very early in my career, and I had a very fast promotion, and I became the youngest manager level employee in my company ever. So I think all these things will matter. And apparently, I mean, if you work for a large employer, it's harder to show these kind of distinctions early in your career.
Great points there. And Daming, how many years of work experience do you have going into the MBA?
Yeah, I mean, when I applied, I had about 3 years. And when I go in, I will have about 4 years.
So just to highlight what you were saying, you got to show progression, you got to show impact, and how you can contribute if you don't work for those so-called blue chip companies. And I mean, I think just to add to that, I think another thing you can do is talk about what makes your company special. So if your company is less well known, we'll make sure that the adcoms know why it's special, whether it's, you know, a market leader in the country you live in, or it's led by a famous executive, or whatever it is, I would encourage applicants to describe your less well-known company in detail as well. So those are some great tips. And then the second misconception was the high GMAT.
I think people have run regressions before, and it shows that having a higher GMAT does increase the chances. But there are many different elements to the application. So firstly, if you have a high GMAT, you're going to improve the school's ranking. The admissions, they are not going to top your quant abilities. But if you don't show a well-rounded personality, well-rounded skill set, if you come across as being overly studious, and then the admission officers might have concerns about your ability to contribute to the school's community or to find a job. I think having a high GMAT is great, but that alone is definitely no guarantee for any admissions. I mean, there are people getting rejected by, Cornell, Duke, despite scoring 760 and 770. And I think especially for Duke, because Duke is a school that's really, really looking for fit and commitment. And for this school, you are very likely to get waitlisted with a higher GMAT score if you don't show enough commitment in the essays. Or by going to the campus visit, because they know that they are being used as a safety school by some strong applicants. So having a high GMAT score for a school like Duke might even give you a disadvantage if you don't write a good essay.
Absolutely. So GMAT scores are important. And in the course that Daming is a part of, our course, the Admissions Edge course, but we talk about how you really need to be strong across all three dimensions. And Daming mentioned those. Academically, you have to be strong to get into a top school. There's no doubt about that with all the competition. So yes, a high GMAT score will help you. But then, like Daming said, you need to be concerned about how will you contribute to that program as well as your employability, right? Just a high GMAT score doesn't equate to high employability. So you need to signal those things to schools, no matter what your GMAT score is. And then, Daming, in terms of school selection, I'm curious how you decided on your schools. Why did you decide to apply, for example, to Kellogg, Insead, Duke, Cornell, Ross, CEIBS, Yale, and Tuck? One
of the greatest, I wouldn't say misconception, but greatest mistakes that people around me make is related to school selection. When people apply to MBAs, they tend to apply to the so-called top brand names, Harvard, Stanford, and in MIT, CBS, Kellogg. That's great, but maybe that's not the most efficient or strategic way of doing it. I mean, you have to first understand what do you want of the MBA. So for me, I decided that I want to get into consulting. Secondly, I want an international network that's also strong in China. And thirdly, I want a school which fits my personalities, right? So I want a school that's collaborative, that's helpful, that enjoys communicating, and hence, once you know these criteria, then it makes your school selection really easy. And I think another important aspect is to really understand where do you stand, or what kind of schools can you get in, and what kind of schools you probably shouldn't try, because admissions is a very time and emotionally consuming exercise, right? I mean, you have to work full time. You have to, you have to study for the GMAT, which is my worst experience. You have to do your extracurriculars. You have to write your essays. You have to network. You have to go to events. You have to. For me, I went to 5 campus visits. It's a really, really time-consuming exercise. If you spend a lot of time writing what matters most to you for Stanford, when you actually have less than 6% chance of getting in, I think that's not worth it. Because I don't need to go to Harvard or Stanford to realize my career goals. There are at least 10 schools that can help me realize my career goals. So I'd rather spend my time efficiently working towards those schools that are equally, good for me as Harvard or Stanford. So I think that's my school selection process, and I think once I've understood that, it's a very easy game. So Kellogg and Insead, they're very strong consulting schools. They focus on teamwork, they focus on collaborations. Duke, Ross are strong in consulting as well, and they place lesser into the top tiers, but they are still strong in consulting, and they are a general management program which emphasizes teamwork. And as for Cornell, Yale, and Tuck, I would say the same thing, but Cornell is a bit more finance driven, but I personally have emotional attachment to the school because for some reasons which is beyond the scope of this discussion.
Okay.
and CEIBS as well. I mean, because I've known the school for more than 10 years. Yeah, it's a very long story. But anyway, it's not really the best fit for me. But I really like the school, so I applied.
Hey, sometimes you just like schools because you like schools. Sometimes,
Yeah.
you just do. So that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. And for CEIBS as well, I mean, CEIBS is because I really want to work in China. So I think CEIBS does have some advantages, in terms of the network. And I've spoken to their people. They're really nice. They click very well with me. So that's one of the schools that I apply to as well.
Clearly, you have done your research on these schools in terms of your 3 goals that you had. What do you think was the best way to do that? Was that talking to students? Was that talking to admissions? Was that school visits? What do you think was the most important for you there?
I think apparently most people begin the school research by looking at the so-called rankings, but that's really the very, very first step.
Yeah.
You have to look at, the school websites. You have to speak to the school alumni. You have to attend events and coffee chats. You have to go to websites like Fuqua and Cornell Johnson, MBA, touchmba.com. You have to speak to people like Darren, and other people who are very established in this game. And for me, I really made the effort to go to campus visit. My choice of schools for campus visit are also very strategic in a sense. I go to the schools that cares about campus visit basically. So I went to Tuck, I went to Duke, I went to Kellogg, and I went to Booth and Yale. I would say Tuck, Duke, Kellogg. Kellogg is excellent, but Tuck and Duke, they really care about campus visit. So I mean, I think I think going to campus really makes a difference, because just looking at how the people behave there, what kind of things they say, getting a feel of the environment, you're going to have a much better understanding of whether, the imaginations you have across the ocean or the internet are true or not. That's good. Yep. And, it's like, I really liked Talk in the beginning, but, and I still think it's a great school, but after going to campus, I felt that, the environment is a bit, maybe it's not for me, yeah, but I'm sure many people enjoy the more kind of like, exclusive, and private environment like in Hanover. Yeah, but I think it's just not for me. As for Kellogg, I think my campus visit was really useful because I managed to attend a few lessons on marketing, which is what they are famous for, but apparently they're not just a marketing school. But I listened to some very interesting insights, and I was able to raise this insight in my interview, on-campus interview. And I said how this is a great compliment to my background. And I can see the interviewer scribbling, aggressively on the paper. So apparently she took that very well. She took the message very well. I think all these are very important ways for you to understand the schools. Oh, and there's another thing I would like to emphasize is that I've also that Kellogg is a school that like people who are involved in campus activities. They are really a student-driven culture, and I myself, I enjoy extracurriculars. I enjoy speaking to people, and after going to the campus, it reinforced that such a fit exists between me and the school. And I managed to communicate this in the interview. I think that really helped.
Yeah, I mean, and when you say that, for example, Kellogg is a really student-driven school, I mean, did you get that perception from when you visited, from, online or from students? Because I think that there's a challenge, right, to go beyond ranking, to go beyond perception, and to really get at the truth or the essence of what a school is like, which obviously takes a lot more work. So I'm kind of curious how you confirmed or came up with new perceptions of your target schools, so that our listeners, for example, can best research their target schools.
There are many websites and materials online that gives you an understanding of the school's culture. And apparently, just by going to some alumni events or other information sessions, you can get a feeling, because, for example, when I went to Kellogg, there were like 13 alumni in the event. But when I went to some other schools, it's like there were not as many. So I think from this you can tell that the bonding of the students are actually different. Yeah. And some of the schools, is like, they openly acknowledge that they are competitive, because they say you have to be competitive in real life, so you might as well start in school. But that's not the case in Kellogg, because they really enjoy, communicating with you, helping you, and they will excitedly tell you about their campus involvements back in school. So I think that really made a difference to me. And like I've mentioned, it's like I think fit is very important, because you will only enjoy, the 2 years if you fit well with the culture, and you only develop strong networks if you enjoyed your time in the school. So going to a place where you will likely suffer is probably not the best idea. Just following rankings or prestige is not the best idea, and it might not guarantee the best admission outcome because you don't fit the school anyway.
I think that's such a great tip, Daming, because to do that, though, requires a lot of self-reflection. Like for you, you have a very concrete idea of what you're looking for out of your MBA. Like you said, consulting, international network, collaborative culture, right? So that helped you quickly sift your choices. So I think that's such a good point. And when you're talking to students, or when you're going to information sessions, or when you're visiting campus, do you enjoy it? I think that's such a really good point to get across, because you can't really determine that by looking at a website. Maybe now if we could talk about your positioning and how you strategized in terms of that part of your application, because I think this is a very common concern that many applicants have. How do I tell my best story, right? I do so many different things. What should I emphasize? Or maybe they feel like they're not very special. What should I emphasize? So for you, we know a bit about your background. I guess my first question to you here is, what was your pitch, or what did you emphasize about your profile?
I think positioning is very strongly related to school fit. I think there are two positioning strategies. One is called fitting in strategy, and one is called standing out strategy. Okay, so in terms of fitting in, right? I think I try to use both. Firstly, I would try to brainstorm the characteristics that are unique to myself. So, it's like I have lots of extracurricular achievements. I founded a very large organization in undergraduate. I have impact ventures, extensive international exposure. I like consulting. I like communicating. I enjoy teamwork. So that you help me select schools like Kellogg, Insead, Ross and Duke. Okay, and once you have chosen these schools, right, there is also a problem, because people like you are likely to apply to these schools as well. So, for example, if you are, just to quote a very, very obvious example, if you're a finance person, or if you're a banker, and you apply to CEIBS or Wharton, there are tons of people like you who are also applying. So your strategy of standing out in this pool is to make sure that you do something that people in this pool don't do, such as you do some very intensive non-profit volunteering. You write some really interesting and different essays that shows your personalities and values. You get a higher GMAT score than the average people in this pool. And that's one strategy. And for Kellogg as well, there are many people from consulting or marketing or Johnson & Johnson, Eli, those kind of Procter, they're applying to Kellogg. But you're just going to be like everyone else. So how do you stand out? You do some things like I've mentioned just now. But there's another way to stand out, okay? That is by applying to a tool that doesn't really fit your profile. Such as if you're a scientist, right? There are many scientists or government officials or bankers who get into Kellogg but couldn't get into schools that seems to fit them. For example, some bankers, they get into Kellogg a lot easier than getting into CBS, but some marketing people, they get into CBS a lot easier than getting into Kellogg. And that's because you're unique. So I think both strategies work very well, but I think you really need to show that on the one hand how you fit in to the school's culture, but on the other hand, after fitting in, how do you stand out from those who fit in?
I think that's a great tip. That's absolutely great. And so did this positioning change for you from school to school, or was it pretty consistent?
To be honest, not really, because I apply to schools which are very similar. My positioning strategies are quite consistent, and this makes my life a lot easier because you don't have to change a story or change a strategy for every different school you apply to. And I think another aspect of my school selection is that I look at the school's essays, right? So just by looking at their essays, I know what they emphasize, what they really, what they value. So personally, I feel that my strengths are my extensive international exposures, my unique career progressions, and I have many stories to tell. So when I look at Wharton, which only has one career goal essay, I know that they are not going to be interested in my background. They're only interested in your GMAT and your employer. That's the message I got. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but that's definitely one of the reasons why I did not apply to Wharton. But when I look at Kellogg, I look at Insead, I look at Duke, I realized that they have given me enough real estate to tell my own story. So I think that makes the entire process a lot more endearing.
You applied to 8 schools all in round 1?
Yeah, all in round 1, because round 2 deadlines are not like tomorrow or something.
So you just found the round 2 deadlines too late, so you just wanted to go for them all in the first round?
No, actually it's more like I didn't really expect to apply to so many schools in the beginning. I applied to Insead. I started Insead in June, and I realized that after writing 2,700 words, applying to the American schools are like a lot easier. And
yeah.
Right. So it's like you realize there are many. There are many, because I apply to schools which are very similar in their emphasis. They ask for the same things, like Ross and Kellogg. They ask for personal and professional challenge. Tuck as well. They ask for collaborative leadership. So they ask for very similar stuff. So it makes my job of applying to the schools a lot easier. And I think the most time-consuming aspect of my application is attending the events, because I finish work at 7, I go to the event, I speak to the people and alumni, and after that I go home at 12. So that's the worst part of my application this year.
Interesting tangent to that. Did you use the same 2 recommenders for all those schools?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I want to share something about recommendation as well. So I can't stress how important it is for you to identify the recommenders long before the process begins. All right. You really need to understand. You really need to make sure your recommenders understand and support your decisions, because if they delay their work, you're not going to apply to so many schools in the wrong one. So. Yes, because I knew I wanted to do an MBA very early in my career, so I actually, made active steps to build relationship with my boss, and when there are opportunities, when we are going to overseas trips together, when there are like free time, I will tell them about my plan, and slowly, you inculcate the idea into their brain that okay, MBA is good for me. And if you do good work for them, they will gradually support your decision.
Let's talk about the interview, because you interviewed with 7 out of 8 of those schools. Because I do think that with schools cutting down on the number of essays, recommendations are becoming more important. Obviously, your CV and your resume, what you've done is really important. But I do think the interview is becoming more and more important. What do you think are, say, your top 3 tips for having a successful interview?
To me, actually, I didn't spend too much time to prepare for my interviews, because I already understand my story very well. So I would say the most important tip of the interview is really know your story. Right? You have to know where you have come from and where you are going to, and why an MBA is the critical bridge to this process. So
you had to answer that question for every school, right?
Yeah, because understanding a story is like the core of all the MBA interview questions. Like no matter what question they ask you, it's going to be related to that question somehow. Like they're definitely going to ask you 5 core questions, like why MBA, why their school, your long-term and short-term goals, and your strengths, your achievements, and some competency questions. They might ask some other random questions, but if you know your story well enough, that's good. That's great. That's good enough for those questions. You can respond in a timely fashion if you know the story well enough. And some interviewers, they might ask you industry questions, so you must make sure that you know your work really well. They might check achievements in your CV to verify whether you really did what you say you did. And so I would say that the first tip is that you really need to know your story well. You need to understand why you're getting this MBA, because if you don't understand why, it's very easy for the interviewer who have interviewed many people before to know that you're smoking and you're bullshitting. that's the first tip, right? Okay, I would say the second tip is to really be authentic, be yourself. Never ever prepare for any specific answers. I mean, you should prepare for the questions, but you should really have a rough idea of the key points, but you should never ever memorize any answers because I think for many kind of interviewers, right, especially alumni interviewers or student interviewers, a key criteria is whether they enjoy being your classmates or
Absolutely.
enjoy having you in their network.
Yeah.
So if they enjoy talking to you, I think you have already won half the battle. So being authentic is extremely, extremely important.
Great tip.
Be yourself. People have, you might find this tip very cliche. Everyone says that be yourself, but really in this context, you really just have to be yourself. Right?
Yes.
Okay, and the third tip for the interview, I would say, you really need to understand the specific aspect of the schools that appeals to you. I know there are many MBA programs that are very similar, they all have the same electives, or at least, different names for same contents, they have the same clubs, they have the same, overseas trips, but there are always some aspects of the program that's different. And you really have to understand those key differences between the schools. And once they, because they might just ask you, so why do you want to come to our school? There are many other schools that can send you into consulting or general management. So why do you pick our school? So you have to mention that you have spoken to alumni. You understand what really makes the school different. And I will say that details are extremely important because it is very easy to say that I love your school, but it's not as easy to mention all the specific details, from the school's activities, from the school's courses, and from what you have said to the specific alumni or student or teachers you have spoken to. That makes a huge difference in terms of communicating your commitment.
I think that's such a good point, Daming. So let me turn this around on you and say, you applied to 7-8 schools. So when you were interviewed by Kellogg, what were your reasons for wanting to apply to Kellogg? In your opinion, what did you say that made Kellogg unique?
So I mentioned a few points. So the first thing I said was that I first met Kellogg alumni in Beijing, when I first came here, through helping entrepreneurs because some of the entrepreneurs are from Kellogg, and by just communicating with them, I felt that I fit into their culture. I really liked speaking to them. I made further efforts to research the school. And then I realized that the school has a very strong student-driven culture. They really want you to join as many clubs as you can, And I mentioned so many different clubs that I wouldn't say are unique to Kellogg, but at least unique in some ways that other schools are not. Like, for example, they have this like a net impact club in Kellogg. They have this hospitality club. I'll mention some of the projects they have done that other schools haven't. Yeah, like I said just now, it's like because I went to a very good marketing course, I gained a very important insight, and I said, this very strong focus on marketing and general management is very valuable for me because I come from a finance background, or rather predominantly finance background, and that's very complementary to my aspiration of becoming a general manager in the future, in the long run, or rather the head of the overseas investment of a Chinese company. So I said that if I go to a finance school like Booth or Wharton or Columbia, I'm not going to get a well-rounded education. But in Kellogg, just by listening to the marketing class just now, I know that I can get a complementary education at Kellogg.
That's great. I think our listeners will really enjoy that because it gives a hint of the effort and the detail, as you mentioned, that you really need to get into in those interviews and in your essays as well, in terms of, why this school. One other question I had for you about the interviews is, at least when I was at SMU, it was very common for the school to give, or the interviewer to give the interviewee a chance to ask him or her questions about his or her experience, right? Whether that's a student or an AdCom member, faculty member, whoever it is. So what types of questions did you ask there?
I would say that the question, apparently you're not going to ask any stupid questions, right? You're not going to ask any questions that can be found online, right?
Yes.
And you're not going to ask any questions that have been discussed in the interview, all right? So that's the ground rules, all right? Okay, but I think apart from this, there are many questions which you can ask legitimately, but I think what really matters in these questions is to show that you are genuinely interested in the answers of the questions. You're not asking for the sake of asking those questions.
Exactly. No, I think that's the key point.
Yeah, because when I spoke to my Insead interviewer, he's a very senior guy. He graduated 30 years ago. He had an extremely impressive international experience. He had served on many countries. He's a CEO before, so I was really impressed by the experience. So I asked him a lot of questions on those, and he seems to be very, he seems to be happily answering my questions and boasting his proud histories. So I think that's it. I think that's what you want to achieve that. And for some other interviewers, if you build a good rapport, then it's more going to be like a natural conversation. If you really want to know some questions that you can ask, I would say there are some very safe choices. Such as you can ask them about their experience, their most memorable experience in school. All right, I think asking this is a safe choice because some alumni didn't enjoy it. they really didn't enjoy the time in the school. So if you ask them about some good experience, they might not be so excited about talking about it. But if you ask about a memorable experience, then they might. It's more safe, I would say. And that's one thing. And the other thing is that I think the question you can ask is you can ask why they pursue an MBA and why they chose the school in the beginning.
No, I think those are some great tips, and the key point that you made is, you be authentic and ask, genuine questions that you have about the person or the school. Like that, building that rapport is more important than a specific type of question. I think that's a really key takeaway from that. So, Daming, do you have any other tips for our listeners?
If I were to say one last thing, I would say that you really need to understand why you are doing this MBA, because there's another misconception which I didn't address just now, is that many people think that Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, or a Magic 7 MBA is going to be the cure to all their problems, but that's not true. Because once you get into the schools, right, you are ground zero. You compete for jobs with your classmates, right? So if your background is not strong, or if you haven't done enough homework about recruitment, you're just going to lose out to all the amazing classmates of yours. So you have to know what you want out of the MBA. You have to know how the MBA can really help you to achieve your goals. And once you have realized that you're really doing an MBA, then you apply to the right schools. And even if you get into the top school, you never have to be, you can never afford to be complacent, because that's not the end of the story. Getting the job you want is the end of the story. Or maybe even that's not the end of the story.
Absolutely. And it's definitely not the end of your story, because congratulations again on getting into some great schools, and wish you the best at Kellogg. And we'll definitely have you back on the podcast again as a student. So this is just the beginning of your journey. And Daming, I just want to thank you for these insights and for sharing them with our listeners. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your #1 school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.